When Donald Trump stood before the room and let his words fly at Barack Obama, it may have seemed to his supporters like just another example of his bluntness. For years, he had built a reputation for speaking without filters, for ridiculing political rivals, and for playing to the crowd by insulting the people he believed were his enemies. But what many people did not realize at the time was that Barack Obama's team had been watching this pattern very closely. The insult itself was not extraordinary compared to others Trump had thrown in the past. Yet it became the spark for a much larger plan that had been quietly forming in the background. Obama's legal advisors had grown accustomed to Trump's rhythm, his tendency to take the stage, throw verbal punches, and then leave the audience buzzing. They knew that eventually one insult would go far enough to justify a serious legal challenge, and they prepared themselves for that exact moment. Trump's words came sharp, mocking Obama's presidential legacy and questioning his role in shaping the country's direction. The room laughed, some cheered, and the cameras caught every second. It was, on the surface, just another jab in a long line of attacks. But behind the scenes, lawyers connected to Obama were already drafting legal documents, examining precedents, and compiling a history of Trump's rhetoric. The lawsuit wasn't a decision made on impulse. It was built on a foundation of repeated behavior. The insult in question became the final straw, the precise moment to move forward with a case that would not only confront Trump's remarks, but also test the boundaries of how far political speech could go before crossing into defamation. The preparation was meticulous. Obama's advisors had gathered transcripts of past rallies, clips from interviews, and public statements where Trump had targeted him by name. Each remark was logged, each insult studied to see whether it contained provable harm or reckless disregard for truth. In the world of law, timing matters almost as much as content, and they understood that if they waited too long, Trump's words would lose their impact in the noisy churn of political media. By acting within seconds of the insult being made public, they caught the attention of the press and the public in a way that would be impossible to ignore. The speed wasn't simply about efficiency, it was about showing control, foresight, and determination. Trump, for his part, didn't anticipate such a direct counterpunch. For years, he had used mocking language about Obama without any legal pushback. He assumed it was part of the political game, something that came with the territory of two figures, locked in the nation's memory as rivals. What he underestimated was the degree to which Obama's team had shifted strategy. They were no longer going to allow verbal attacks to float unchecked through the public sphere. By choosing the insult at that fundraising event as the breaking point, they signaled that patience had run out. Words would now carry consequences, and those consequences would be measured in millions. The lawsuit for $100 million wasn't about personal revenge, though it certainly carried personal undertones. It was about building a case that Trump's repeated attacks had a measurable effect on Obama's reputation, both domestically and internationally. In legal terms, they argued that the comments weren't just political disagreements, but statements designed to cause harm. Statements that stretched beyond opinion and into defamation. This distinction mattered. Political speech is protected broadly under the First Amendment, but knowingly false or damaging remarks open a very different legal door. Obama's advisors wanted to demonstrate that Trump had crossed that threshold, and the insult delivered that night provided the clearest evidence. The image of Obama's lawyers filing documents almost immediately after Trump's remarks spread quickly. Analysts called it one of the fastest legal responses to a political insult in modern history. The public could see that this was not reactionary anger, it was preparation meeting opportunity. For Trump, it was a reminder that his words, while powerful in drawing crowds and headlines, also made him vulnerable when they slipped into personal attacks. For Obama, it was the beginning of a legal strategy designed to set limits on how far those attacks could go. The insult may have been just another moment in Trump's long history of public barbs, but the preparation behind the response showed it was much more than that. It revealed the patience and strategy of a team waiting for the perfect opening, and when Trump gave it to them, they wasted no time turning it into a lawsuit that captured the nation's attention. The figure of $100 million stood out immediately, not just because of its size, but because of the message it carried. When Barack Obama's legal team filed the lawsuit against Donald Trump, they were not simply looking for compensation. They were setting a precedent and sending a signal about the cost of unchecked rhetoric. For years, Trump had spoken in ways that blurred the line between personal insult and political critique. His remarks about Obama had become a recurring theme in speeches, interviews, and social media posts. Yet this time, the response was not silence, not a witty comeback in the press, but a demand for damages that translated his words into measurable consequences. The number was chosen deliberately large enough to make headlines, large enough to underline seriousness, and large enough to demonstrate that reputation and truth are not things to be toyed with freely. Obama's advisors understood the psychology of scale. If they filed for a small amount, it would look like a symbolic gesture or a mere attempt to make noise. If they chose a figure like $100 million, the story shifted entirely. that some suggested not only injury but also valuation, the idea that words can cause financial, professional, and reputational harm of staggering magnitude. It framed Trump's insult as something that didn't vanish after the crowd stopped clapping but instead carried weight far beyond the room in which it was spoken. The lawsuit declared that a former president's standing on the world stage, his credibility, and the trust placed in him by millions could not be dismissed lightly. And Trump, who had built his brand around money and deals, was suddenly confronted with a figure that mirrored his own language of wealth but turned it against him. Asterisk. The size of the lawsuit also had a legal function. In cases involving defamation, damages are often calculated not only by the harm already caused, but by the potential for future harm. Obama's legal team argued that Trump's remarks, repeated across media platforms and amplified by his supporters, could affect speaking opportunities, influence over charitable projects, and even international partnerships where Obama's voice still mattered. By placing a dollar amount so high, they emphasized that the damage was not abstract but real, measurable, and continuing. This was not just about pride, it was about the tangible costs of reckless speech. Asterisk. Trump, of course, saw it differently. He was quick to dismiss the lawsuit as political theater, calling it an overreaction and mocking the figure as inflated. Yet even he could not avoid the reality that a $100 million lawsuit was not something to ignore. It would require lawyers, court appearances, and potentially long months of legal wrangling. The weight of the figure itself forced him into a defensive posture, a position he rarely liked to occupy. Trump thrived on F&Son being the one who attacked, insulted, and destabilized his opponents. But this lawsuit made him the target, and the sheer amount claimed meant the story stayed in the news cycle far longer than any single insult might have otherwise lasted. Asterisk. Observers noted how carefully the number fit into the broader narrative. Obama, known for his calm and measured demeanor, was not someone associated with rash gestures. If his team chose that figure, they did so with strategy, ensuring that the lawsuit could not be dismissed as trivial. Legal scholars pointed out that even if the final judgment, should the case succeed, amounted to less than the claim, the figure itself had already accomplished its purpose. It made people pay attention, and it forced Trump's words to be scrutinized in a courtroom rather than just debated in the press. It also placed other public figures on notice. Defamation at that level could come with consequences, not easily brushed aside. Asterisk. The $100 million claim carried symbolic undertones to. It was a way of matching Trump's world, a world built on towers with his name, claims of billionaire status, and constant references to deals and money. By choosing that amount, Obama's side spoke in a language Trump could not ignore, the language of wealth and financial power. It was a reminder that reputation, like property, could be valued, and that destruction of it came with a price tag. The figure wasn't chosen simply for legal reasons. It was chosen for resonance, for the way it would echo in headlines and conversations, for how it would stick in the minds of those who heard it. Asterisk. For many who watched the events unfold, the $100 million lawsuit became less about whether Obama would ultimately receive that amount and more about the principle it represented. It reframed the conversation from one about political sparring to one about accountability. Trump's insult had been quick, perhaps even thoughtless, but the lawsuit underscored that thoughtless words could create real consequences. It was a challenge not just to Trump, but to the culture of political discourse he had shaped, a culture where insults and attacks were currency. In that sense, the figure was both legal strategy and cultural statement. By attaching such a massive dollar value to the harm, Obama's team forced the nation to confront a simple but unsettling question. What is the true cost of reckless speech when it is amplified by the power of a political figure like Donald Trump? The timing of Barack Obama's legal response to Donald Trump's insult was what stunned people most. 17 seconds. That was all it took from the moment Trump's words hit the airwaves to the moment Obama's lawsuit became public knowledge. At first, some thought it was coincidence, an oddly fast reaction that happened to align with Trump's remark, but as details emerged, it became clear that this speed was no accident. It was strategy, carefully orchestrated by Obama's legal team to deliver maximum impact. They had been monitoring Trump's rhetoric for years, anticipating that sooner or later he would cross a line that could justify a formal legal move. When the insult came, they were ready to press the button without hesitation, showing the world that they were not improvising but executing a plan. Asterisk. Trump had built a career, both in business and in politics, on surprise moves and shock value. He thrived on unpredictability, on catching opponents unprepared. Whether it was a late-night social media post, an offhand comment at a rally, or a cutting remark in an interview, he relied on being the one to dictate the tempo of the fight. Yet in this case, Obama's team turned that dynamic on its head. By responding almost instantly, they denied Trump the usual breathing room he counted on. There was no opportunity for him to bask in the reaction, no chance to ride the news cycle for hours before anyone countered. Instead, the counterpunch came with a precision that left even his supporters momentarily disoriented. Asterisk. The preparation behind that 17-second window had been meticulous. Obama's lawyers had pre-drafted portions of the lawsuit, leaving only specific details to be filled in once the triggering remark was made. They had systems in place to monitor Trump's appearances, ensuring that every word he spoke publicly was recorded, transcribed, and evaluated in real time. When the insult landed, all it took was confirmation from legal analysts that it fit the criteria for defamation, and the documents were filed. It wasn't improvisation, it was execution of a plan waiting for the right spark. The speed of the response became a story in itself, a reminder that strategy could match and even surpass spontaneity. Trump's reaction was telling. He initially dismissed the lawsuit as ridiculous and tried to laugh off the timing as staged theatrics. But even he could not escape the optics of being hit with a $100 million legal claim, less than half a minute after speaking. For someone who prided himself on dominating news cycles, the tables had turned. Instead of headlines focusing solely on his insult, they carried side-by-side coverage of Obama's legal strike. Commentators remarked that the insult itself was barely remembered because the lawsuit overshadowed it so completely. In the world of public perception, timing often mattered more than substance. And in this case, Obama's camp understood that perfectly. Observers saw the move as an example of patience combined with readiness. Rather than chasing every insult Trump hurled over the years, Obama's team had waited for the moment that would carry the most weight. They didn't just want to respond, they wanted to demonstrate control. The 17-second gap symbolized discipline, the ability to anticipate without overreacting, to strike with precision rather than emotion. For many who had watched Trump dominate political theater for years, it was the first time they saw him outpaced not by louder words but by sharper strategy. The rapid filing also sent a message to Trump himself. It told him that he was not as untouchable as he believed, that his words were being tracked and could be weaponized against him in real time. For a man who thrived on being unpredictable, it must have been unsettling to realize that someone else was anticipating his moves and preparing counters with military-like efficiency. This was not a courtroom battle that began weeks after an insult. It began before his words even stopped echoing in the room. That level of immediacy was designed to throw him off balance. The legal and political worlds took note. Analysts discussed how the lawsuit's timing might set a new standard for public figures confronting defamation. No longer would they wait days or weeks to respond. Obama's move demonstrated that speed itself could be part of the strategy, magnifying the impact of the claim. By filing within seconds, they captured media attention and left no doubt about the seriousness of their intent. It wasn't just a lawsuit, it was a statement of readiness, a demonstration of how thoroughly they had studied Trump's patterns. In the end, the 17 seconds became almost as important as the lawsuit itself. It symbolized foresight, discipline, and tactical precision in the face of a man who thrived on chaos. Trump's insult might have been meant to dominate the moment, but instead it became the trigger for one of the fastest and most high-profile legal responses in memory. For Obama's camp, that timing wasn't just about filing papers, it was about reclaiming control of the narrative and showing that even someone as unpredictable as Donald Trump could be anticipated, countered, and challenged in a way that left him on the defensive. The clash between Donald Trump and Barack Obama over that insult and the subsequent $100 million lawsuit quickly grew beyond a personal dispute. What began as one man mocking another on stage transformed into a national conversation about the limits of speech in politics. For years, Trump had relied on his ability to say things others would not, using language that blurred the line between criticism and insult. His supporters celebrated this as honesty, a willingness to reject political correctness and speak bluntly. His critics, however, saw it as recklessness, a pattern of behavior that eroded public discourse and caused real damage. When Obama's legal team responded so decisively, it forced everyone watching to ask whether there should be consequences for words that reach millions and potentially shape public opinion in destructive ways. Obama's lawsuit argued that Trump's insult was not merely opinion but defamatory, that it was designed to tarnish his reputation deliberately. That framing challenged a long-standing assumption that public figures must accept insults as part of the job. The case pressed on a deeper question: at what point does free speech turn into defamation? And how should society respond when the speaker is not an ordinary citizen but a former president with a platform that influences millions? The tension between free expression and accountability became the central issue. Obama, who had often been measured and deliberate in his responses to critics during his presidency, chose this moment to draw a line, signaling that there must be boundaries even in the rough world of politics. Trump, on the other hand, treated the lawsuit as an attack, not just on him but on political speech itself. He framed Obama's move as an attempt to silence dissent and argued that if his words could be punished in court, then political debate across the country would be at risk. To his base, this argument resonated. They saw him as standing up against a culture that was increasingly eager to police language and punish those who spoke outside accepted norms. The irony was that Trump's words, which had always been his greatest weapon, now had the potential to become his greatest liability. The lawsuit didn't just threaten financial loss, it threatened to reshape the way he wielded language. Legal experts quickly recognized that the outcome of the case could influence more than just the two men involved. If Obama succeeded, it would establish that even someone as high-profile as Trump could be held accountable for defamation in the political arena. That precedent could ripple outward, affecting how politicians, commentators, and public figures approach their rhetoric. The idea of consequences, real financial and reputational consequences, would no longer be theoretical. It would be proven in court. For some, this was a necessary correction, a way to restore responsibility in an environment where words had become weapons with no cost. For others, it was a chilling possibility, one that could discourage sharp criticism and limit the raw energy of political debate. Asterisk. The lawsuit also highlighted the evolution of political conflict in the digital era. Trump's insult, amplified instantly by social media, reached far beyond the walls of the room where it was spoken. Within minutes, millions had heard or read about it, spreading it further than any local insult of the past could have traveled. Obama's team understood this amplification, which was part of why they acted so quickly. They wanted to show that the speed with which words spread could be matched by the speed of accountability. In doing so, they reframed the insult as more than just rhetoric. It became a test case for how societies deal with the collision of free speech, technology, and responsibility. Asterisk. For Trump, the battle was about maintaining his brand as a fighter who never backed down. He thrived on framing conflicts as personal grudges that symbolized larger cultural wars. By mocking Obama and then facing a lawsuit, he painted himself as the target of an establishment trying to silence him. For Obama, the confrontation was about principle. It was not only about defending his name, but also about challenging a culture that allowed powerful figures to spread damaging claims without consequence. Their clash captured the duality of American politics. One side prioritizing unfiltered expression as a symbol of freedom, the other prioritizing accountability as a safeguard of truth. Asterisk. As the story unfolded, it became clear that this was not just about Trump versus Obama. It was about the public's relationship with truth, speech, and power. Millions watched closely, not simply because of the personalities involved, but because the case asked a question that touched every corner of public life. Should people in positions of influence be free to say whatever they want, or should they be bound by the same rules of responsibility as anyone else? The insult had triggered a lawsuit, but the lawsuit had triggered something larger, a national debate about the value of words and the price of crossing certain lines. The confrontation between Donald Trump and Barack Obama over a single insult that spiraled into a $100 million lawsuit became more than a headline. It became a lens through which the nation examined itself. What started as an offhand remark at a podium turned into a battle that blended law, politics, and culture. Each stage of the clash revealed something deeper, not just about the men involved, but about the society that watched and debated every detail. The insult was sharp, but the lawsuit's impact was sharper, showing that words could no longer be dismissed as fleeting when spoken by someone with power. Asterisk. The preparation behind Obama's response told its own story. His team had anticipated Trump's style, building a case long before the insult was even made. It was patience meeting opportunity, strategy defeating spontaneity. This wasn't about lashing out in anger, but about holding a rival accountable. In a system where accountability often feels absent, it set a tone that echoed beyond politics. Planning and foresight could overcome chaos, and even the most unpredictable personalities could be met with discipline and control. Asterisk. The figure of $100 million underscored the gravity of the moment. It wasn't just about money, it was about attaching weight to reputation and truth. By choosing such a figure, Obama's team made clear that the damage from words could be vast, measurable, and costly. Trump, a man who had built his public persona around wealth and boldness, suddenly found himself facing the same language of money, but in a way that turned his strength into vulnerability. The lawsuit reframed political insults as actions with a price tag, transforming rhetoric into liability. Asterisk. The timing of the lawsuit became a turning point in itself. 17 seconds was all it took to shift the story from Trump's insult to Obama's counterattack. That speed symbolized readiness, discipline, and an understanding of the media age, where narratives shift in real time. Trump, who thrived on dominating the pace of the news cycle, was suddenly overtaken. For the first time, it wasn't his unpredictability that shaped the conversation, but someone else's preparation. In politics, timing is power, and Obama's team wielded it with precision. Asterisk. Beyond the personal clash, the lawsuit ignited a larger debate about freedom of speech, responsibility, and the boundaries of political discourse. Trump argued that his words were part of the rough-and-tumble nature of politics, while Obama's side insisted that there are limits, that defamation and deliberate harm should not be excused as mere opinion. The lawsuit asked whether powerful figures should be held to a higher standard when their words carry global reach. It forced the public to confront uncomfortable questions about truth, accountability, and the value of reputation. Asterisk. In the end, The fight was about more than two men who had long been rivals. It was about the culture they represented. Trump embodied a politics of blunt force, where saying anything was seen as strength. Obama represented a politics of boundaries, where responsibility and accountability had to anchor public life. Their clash symbolized a larger struggle within the nation itself, a struggle over how much words should matter, and what consequences should follow when they are used recklessly. The insult may have lasted seconds, but the debate it sparked will linger far longer, shaping how America thinks about speech, power,